There are things in this world that you genuinely cannot unsee. And I don't mean that in some dramatic, philosophical way. I mean it literally. Once you learn certain things about a person, about what they're capable of, you can never look at them the same way again. This story was sent to me by a viewer named Marcus. He's based out of the Pacific Northwest, works in insurance, keeps to himself. Normal guy, normal life. Until the day his wife asked him a simple question that ended up unraveling something that neither of them were prepared for. She asked him, "Do you ever feel like someone is watching our house?" That question kicked off a 4-month investigation that Marcus says changed the way he looks at the neighborhood he grew up in. And honestly, after reading what he sent me, I can't say I blame him. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm your host, and this is The Deadly Talk, where real people share the stories they can't stop thinking about. I've been doing this for over 2 decades. I've read hundreds of thousands of stories, and the ones that hit the hardest every single time aren't about the unknown. They're about the person who was standing way closer to you than you ever realized. Let's get into it. Marcus and his wife Dana had been living in the same house in a quiet suburb of Spokane, Washington, for about 6 years at the point this story takes place. Nice neighborhood, older houses, decent-sized lots, the kind of street where people wave when they drive by. They had 2 kids, a dog, a routine. Nothing out of the ordinary. Dana was a school librarian. She worked early mornings and was usually home by 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Marcus worked a 9 to 5, sometimes later. So for a few hours every day, Dana was home alone with the kids. She never said anything to Marcus for a while because she didn't want to sound paranoid. But she'd started noticing a car, a dark blue sedan, older, slightly beat up and parked on their street. Not directly in front of their house, a few houses down, just close enough to have a clear sightline to their driveway. It wasn't there every day, but it was there enough that she started noticing the pattern. Tuesday afternoons, sometimes Thursday mornings, always during the window where Marcus was at work and the kids were at school. She told herself it was probably someone visiting a neighbor, maybe a caregiver for one of the older residents on the block. She let it go. But then one day she was in the kitchen, and she looked out the window and the car was there, and without really thinking about it, she picked up her phone and took a picture. 2 days later, she took another one. And then she just kept doing it. She'd see the car, she'd snap a photo, she'd go about her day. She had maybe 8 or 9 pictures before she ever mentioned it to Marcus. When she finally showed him, his first instinct was the same as hers. He wasn't worried. He said it was probably nothing. Maybe a home contractor who parked in the neighborhood between jobs. Maybe someone picking up kids from school and sitting early. But then he looked at the timestamps on the pictures. Every single one was taken on a day when he was at work. Marcus had a buddy from college and a guy named Trevor, who had left a corporate gig about 8 years prior and started his own private investigation firm. Nothing fancy, mostly infidelity cases and background checks. But Marcus reached out and asked if Trevor could take a look at the situation, just casually, just to put their minds at ease. Trevor came by the house, walked the block, looked at Dana's photos, and asked a few questions. Standard stuff. Did they have any disputes with neighbors? Any recent confrontations? Anyone they'd fired? An ex they'd lost touch with? The answer to all of it was no. Trevor said he'd do some passive surveillance over the next week or 2. Drive by at various times of day, keep an eye on the street, document anything that stood out. Low-key, nothing aggressive. 3 days in, he called Marcus and told him to sit down. He had found the car. It was registered to a 61-year-old man named Gerald, who lived about 4 miles away. Trevor ran him through the usual databases. No criminal record, not on any registry, not flagged anywhere. Just a regular guy, retired, widower. And here's where it gets strange. Trevor had decided to dig a little deeper on Gerald. Just routine due diligence. And in the process, he started pulling together a timeline. Gerald's known addresses over the last 12 years, public records, social media. The basic stuff anyone with the right access can pull. Gerald had lived at 5 different addresses in a 12-year span. That in itself isn't alarming. People move. But Trevor noticed that 3 of those addresses were in neighborhoods where something had been filed. Not criminal charges, not police reports exactly. Neighbor complaints, noise ordinance calls, code enforcement issues. Trevor told Marcus those didn't mean anything on their own. Neighbor disputes happen. But then he found something that genuinely stopped him. One of the complaint filings from Gerald's previous neighborhood had been submitted by a woman named Carol who lived across the street from him at his last address. It was a pretty ordinary complaint. She said a vehicle had been parking near her home repeatedly and she found it unsettling. Trevor tracked down Carol's current contact information and called her. He introduced himself, explained he was a PI, said he was looking into a neighbor situation and was hoping she could share her experience. Carol was quiet for a long moment on the phone. Then she said, "Did he move somewhere new?" Trevor told her yes. She said, "Then whoever he's watching needs to know." Carol described almost the exact same experience that Dana had described. The car parked where it had a view of her home, always during the hours when her husband was at work. She'd photographed it too. She'd even approached the car once and knocked on the window. Gerald had been sitting inside completely still, with a small notebook in his lap. He'd rolled down the window, smiled at her, and said he was waiting for a friend. She'd filed the neighbor complaint. Nothing came of it legally because he was always on a public street. Her husband had confronted him once and Gerald had been perfectly polite. Apologized for causing any concern. Said he'd make sure to park elsewhere. And then about a month after that, he moved. Carol told Trevor something else, something she'd noticed toward the end of his time in the neighborhood. She said one morning, very early, like 6 a.m, she came downstairs and the motion light above her garage had been triggered. She looked out the window. Gerald was standing at the end of her driveway, not doing anything, not approaching the house, just standing there, watching. She didn't see a car nearby. He appeared to have walked there. When she opened the front door, he turned and walked calmly down the street without a word. Trevor brought all of this to Marcus, and Marcus did the thing that I think most of us would do in that situation. He wanted to find out if there were more women like Carol. It took Trevor about 2 weeks of deeper digging to find them. He found 2 others, one from Gerald's address 6 years back and one from 8 years back. Different neighborhoods, different women, same profile, married, kids, husband, or partner with a standard work schedule. Every single one of them had noticed the car first. None of them had been physically harmed. Gerald had never made contact, never confronted anyone, never entered a property. He just watched. For weeks or sometimes months at a time, and then apparently when the family caught on or the scrutiny got too uncomfortable, he moved. Marcus said the part that made his stomach drop wasn't even the watching. It was the notebooks. Carol had mentioned a small notebook in his lap when she knocked on his window. One of the other women Trevor spoke to said that when she'd confronted Gerald, who was parked a few houses down, she'd looked into his car and saw a composition book on the passenger seat with what looked like pages and pages of notes inside. Marcus asked Trevor, "What is he writing down?" Trevor told him he didn't know, and that was the part they'd probably never know. Marcus and Dana brought everything to the police, and this is the part of the story that I think is going to sound familiar to a lot of you, unfortunately. The officer was sympathetic. He was, but he told them that Gerald had not broken any laws. He'd parked on public streets, he'd never made threats. He'd never entered their property. He'd never communicated with Dana in any way. He had a constitutional right to sit in his car on a public road. They could file a report, it would be on record. But without an actual crime, there was nothing to charge him with. The officer did say that if Marcus or Dana saw Gerald on their street again, they could approach him with a police escort and request that he stop coming to their neighborhood. Not legally binding, but sometimes it was enough. Trevor on his own made an unofficial visit to Gerald's home. He knocked on the door, identified himself as a private investigator, and told Gerald very plainly that his presence had been documented and that the family he was watching was aware of him. Gerald, according to Trevor, was completely calm. He thanked Trevor for coming by. He said he wasn't sure what Trevor was referring to. He wished him a good afternoon and closed the door. The blue sedan never came back to Marcus's street after that. Marcus told me that in some ways that was the most disturbing part of all. Not the confrontation, not the police visit. The fact that Gerald simply stopped, as if he'd crossed something off a list and moved on. Marcus says he and Dana have since installed cameras on the exterior of their house. They know their neighbors' schedules better now. They pay attention to unfamiliar vehicles. And he said something to me at the end of his message that I haven't been able to shake since I read it. He said, "The thing that messes with me most is that we lived there for 6 years before Dana noticed the car. And I've thought about that a lot. Because what if she hadn't? What if she'd never said anything? How long had this actually been going on? He said they went back through their outdoor security camera history. They'd had a basic doorbell camera for about 2 years. They reviewed 4 months' worth of footage from the days Gerald's car had shown up based on Dana's photos, on 11 separate recordings partially blocked by the neighbor's oak tree at the edge of the frame. You could see the sedan. On 4 of those recordings, you could see the driver's side window was rolled down. And on one of them, for about 30 seconds before Gerald apparently noticed the camera and rolled the window up, you could see him. He had binoculars. There was no grand revelation at the end of this story. No arrest, no explanation, no notebook full of answers. Gerald is out there somewhere. Probably a new neighborhood. Probably a new street. Probably a new family who hasn't noticed the car yet. And honestly, that's what keeps me up about this one. It's not the monster under the bed. It's the retired man parked 3 houses down who's been there 4 times this week, and whose name you don't know. Thank you to Marcus for sending this in. You know how to reach me if you want your story told.